Thank you so much. Thank you very much for this presentation. My interest is the understanding of like how does this concept, if I may put it that way, go beyond these walls? Like when I say that, I mean to the community, you know, my community, if I can put it that way. Sorry, I'm not rich, but if I can put it that way. Because, you know, in our community, our people, they think it's normal. For example, to live in a dirty street. I'm just making an example. Because maybe the municipality is not cleaning accordingly. So when people see something that is, I know is abnormal, ordinary people, they think it's normal to have potholes. They think it's a normal way of living. And then crime, they think it's a normal way of living. And in communities now, for example, there are people who have established volunteers. They've established community safety. Not the CPF, Community Police Forum, but it's a community on its own, like in their streets. 4 o'clock in the morning, they wake up and then they accompany people going to taxi stops and all that because of crime. Now, my question is then, how do we get to this information to people to understand the recourse that it's not normal to live like this? As a community, this is what you can do. You know, because this is what I'm learning, I'm sort of understanding of your presentation. Yes. Correct me if I'm wrong. So I would like to understand the practicality. Yes. How do I take it to my community with you or whoever? Yes. You are talking about a launch, but how far have you gone to do awareness about this kind of, thank you.
Yes. No, thank you for that. No, so I mean, you've already touched on that community it already instinctively understands that things are falling apart. No one is coming from Pretoria. No one is even coming from the province, and increasingly no one's coming from the municipality. So who do we complain to? We can't complain to anyone. We just have to do it. So that's the beauty of what we're advocating here, and that is that it's an instinctive thing. Human beings want to be safe, they want to live comfortably, and if the structures that we formulated at a very high level can no longer provide that, then we will do it ourselves. Simply, we will do it ourselves. Now, that can get very ugly, which we've seen in some places around the country where we see vigilante justice, where we see mob violence and so on. That's a problem. You don't want to end up in a society like that, but really that's natural. If the police aren't coming and if there is no kind of other method to kind of solve the problem, that is going to happen. So my just kind of a practical thing here is the principle of organization. That is something that I think is already happening where you're from. Organize, create the structures, create community structures. That is what David had said earlier about formalizing the safety structures at the boardwalk, formalize the partnership with private security. Have it on paper. Just the act of writing something down and saying this is how we're going to do it. That is a very small version of constitutionalism. It is a very small way of bringing law into total disorder if you just write something down. Organize. Now, as far as us and communicating these ideas, so it's very early days. The Free Market Foundation, we've existed since 1975. We're a very old institution. We've long believed in federalism. During the transition from apartheid, our previous CEO, Leon Lowe, and his wife, Francis Kendall, wrote the book, South Africa, The Solution, where he effectively popularized the idea of Swiss federalism in South Africa to really allow very small communities to have large authority over their own safety and infrastructure and so on. And a lot of that made it into the constitution. Like I said, it's a federal constitution. So we were halfway there, and we're now the FMF is at that stage where we want to start packing substance onto that form. Now, this roadshow is our first one, David, on the campaign, and we're going to do many more. We're never going to cover the whole country, but that's why we also want to encourage groups like this, and maybe when you go back to your community to take this and maybe establish a home rule society in your community, a discussion group to bring people around, discuss this booklet. We have a website that's going to be populated with much more information and practical case studies and so on, where we find them and popularize these ideas. Even if you don't trust your municipality to become a home rule municipality, that doesn't matter. Then implement it in your community, in your street even. We as the FMF cannot bring it to everyone. We sit in a nice office in Johannesburg. We're not on the ground in these communities. We're going to try and do it in our own community, but ultimately it's up to the people themselves to, if they agree with kind of the basic model we've set out, to really popularize it in those communities. But really, like I said, what we're talking about here is simply already happening. What I referred in the booklet, I say that federalism is emergent in South Africa. It's boiling, it's coming. It's not going to be a top-down federal dispensation. It's going to be bottom-up, simply because we don't have another choice, and people understand that.
Yeah, and we are a small organization. I think we punch above our weight, but also the principle that we're trying to convey here is, it's not like we are going to be the central coordinators of this. We want to spread the idea. And I mean, just even in the 2 engagements that we've had since we've been here, we've learned a lot about the particular circumstances of Nelson Mandela Bay. And there's no way that anyone, no matter how intelligent or well-informed, can determine what happens in some faraway jurisdiction and make decisions on behalf of others. Just on your point, I mean, I think something anecdotally that I've been seeing, I mean, during the transition in the early to mid 1990s, my family, my parents moved us into a gated community in South Africa, Fourways Gardens. And that was one of the first gated communities in Johannesburg. But now we see gated communities everywhere, right? And I think, a lot of people have criticized those and said, oh, that's elitist, and the middle classes are kind of locking themselves away, and whilst everybody else suffers in poverty. But, if you go to, I mean, there's many in the Western Cape now as well, places like George, Somerset West. These are actually very important mechanisms for preserving value, safety, and security, and very interestingly, no longer the exclusive preserve of the middle classes. We're seeing in places like Soweto now, not on the same scale, but we're seeing people cordoning off roads, having access control mechanisms, and also in kind of traditional suburbs, you're seeing that as well. And that requires coordination and bringing people together. So I think, if you had said 50 years ago that there would be all of these gated communities, people would have thought, oh, that's quite bizarre. Why would that happen? But these changes occur, and society is a very dynamic thing. It's constantly evolving. And I think our job, we see it, is to kind of point out these trends and these changes and encourage people in that direction as well. But we're not going to command you to do these things. You have to take it upon yourselves.
Hello, my name's Talitha Bash. I've just relocated from Johannesburg to PE. I'm not sure yet. Yeah, well, after my experience recently, I doubt it. So I've been a victim of crime within the first 3 weeks of being here, and a home invasion. And so I've got 3 things that I would like to ask you. Number 1, how are you engaging with big business? How do they view you? And what are you doing in terms of lobbying big business to align with your policies? Number two, what is your view? I know we've touched on crime, but what is your view on crime post the election? Do you think anything is going to change in terms of SAPS? Because where there's crime, there's no investment. Where there's crime, there's nobody's going to do business. It's simple. And at the moment, PE seems to be sparking in crime, and it's very sad to see. And my third question, which I'd want to ask you, is when will you be back? And what can we do in the meantime to actually get something happening? Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Shall I do crime first?
Okay.
Crime.
Oh, we're being missed already, and we haven't even left.
Yeah, so I'm going to take your second question about crime. So the Free Market Foundation, earlier this year, we began a different initiative. It's called Section 12, the Section 12 initiative, which is all about crime, violent crime. So we're very much honing in on violent crime. And it refers to Section 12 of the Constitution, and which says that everyone is in South Africa has the right to be free from all forms of violence, both public and private. That's Section 12 of the Constitution. And I mean, as you just said, we all live the violation of this provision of our Constitution. We are in theory free from, have the right to be free from crime, but it's a fantasy. So what we've proposed there is various tangible steps to address violent crime in South Africa. Now, just to kind of touch on specifically your question about the SAPS. No, the SAPS is not going to be reformed, even if there is a multi-party charter government next year. Everything that the politicians from those parties have told us is that it will take years upon years upon years to fix existing government institutions, specifically the police, which is a top-heavy institution with hundreds of generals and majors and colonels and so on, and maybe one or two constables on ground floor every now and then. So the SAPS is the way I've described it at other engagements is that the criminal justice system in South Africa is not collapsing, it has collapsed. It's done, it's over. The formal systems of justice are collapsed. The good thing, the good story is that organized communities do in fact have a tangible effect against crime. We can take the July 2021 riots. They caused massive destruction in KwaZulu-Natal and in Gauteng, except where the community was ready and waiting. Those areas are weren't quite harmed, not even close as much as the communities that weren't ready. So those communities that organized, that had neighborhood watches, that communicated through radio, even over large distances to know that the rioters are coming, they were protected, because when the rioters saw that they were meeting resistance, they went elsewhere. They went to the path of lowest resistance, and that's going to be the nature of things. So that's a good example. Then there's another example which is being implemented in various places in the north, and I think what you call it here in Nelson Mandela Bay is a special ratings authority, which is effectively a form of gated kind of community. Sometimes it's gated, where you pay a little bit more in your rates, and then the community has some security complementary services to the municipality. All you do is you make it a little bit more unattractive to commit crime in your area. And that goes a long way. And that sends up property prices, that creates an air of safety. So what we would say tangibly is, if you want to solve violent crime as a very practical step, something you can do tomorrow, you have to get together with your street, with your community, and organize and do something. At the very least, establish a WhatsApp group and a community and a neighborhood watch. That really does go a long way, even though it sounds kind of superficial on the surface. Forget about the South African Police Service. It's a path of total disappointment. Do not think about reforming or fixing the SAPS. If the SAPS is to be fixed, that is a 50-year kind of goal that we all hope for. It's not going to be fixed anytime soon. So rather start at least mentally thinking about solving the problem yourselves in your communities. And of course, please support our Section 12 project, which is also about changing how we think about crime, how we talk about crime. And you can find the information at section12.org.za. There's a lot of information there. And yeah, you can support us with that as well. David.
Yeah, then your question about the role of business, I think, is really important, and it's critical to distinguish between big organized business and the little guy, the small businesses. And we as the Free Market Foundation have been very critical of organized business. I mentioned earlier that we're capitalists, so some people are a bit surprised to see us criticizing the big businesses in South Africa. But there is a term that you might hear quite frequently, which is a social compact. And that is something that has been driven by the political establishment in South Africa to legitimize its policy agenda. And those policies are what is causing such damage to South Africa's economy. And big business, we argue, is complicit in reinforcing this, because you have people basically falling for this trap, which is the fallacy of access, that if they have a seat at the table, they can influence business. But actually what happens is that they can influence government. So what actually happens is government uses that round table colloquium or whatever it is to justify its own policy actions. So I think a very telling example of this is Mr. Adrian Gore, a very gifted businessman, a very smart guy, but he's the co-convener of BUSA, Business Unity South Africa, and one of his initiatives is to raise 170 million rand, which is quite a lot of money, to provide technical assistance and support to the government. But we argue that this is just mopping up the mess that the government itself has created. Think of what you could do with 170 million rand in some of these small towns and cities where actual businesses are being impacted every day. And we understand the impulse, why these big businesses, their bottom line is also being affected, and they kind of, if you're a mining company and the criminal syndicates are stealing your copper cable, it makes it very difficult to do business. So they look around and they think, well, we need somebody to do something about this, let's help the government to do it. But that is a fundamental strategic error. We need to create power outside of the state, and business has the resources and the technical know-how and the expertise to do that. So, we mentioned those special rates.
40s.
So that is businesses also coming together to improve their districts. That's the small guy. We can go into a long discussion about how other areas of policy impact on businesses, small businesses, that are the result of these social compacts. We've been very critical of the national minimum wage in South Africa. Sounds very nice, like, everybody must have a basic level of income from their work, but the real minimum wage in South Africa is zero, because we have many, many millions of people, about 11 million people who are unemployed in South Africa, because they're locked out of the labor market by these highly restrictive policies like the Labor Relations Act and the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. That's just one example of how big business and government get together and they agree something that suits them and their interests, but most other people, including small businesses, suffer. So we want to break that monopolistic type of behavior and that corporatist dynamic. Corporatism is that very close collaboration between the big businesses and also organized labor and government.
David, if I can just add briefly onto that. So we don't oppose the phenomenon of big business. We think profit is a wonderful thing, and the bigger your business, the more power to you. So we're engaging constructively with big business. We're going to them and we're saying, listen, you should not be ashamed of the fact that you have done well. You should own that, and you should be like, we have provided value to South Africa, and South Africa has rewarded us handsomely for doing that. But David didn't get into this, but we think that it's part of that feeling of guilt that big business has, this idea that somehow it's unfair that we have so much and others have so little, that they fall into these very destructive relationships with government, and they keep trying to capacitate a very corrupt, a very inefficient, very incompetent institution. And our message really to big business is, listen, rather than doing that, and if you want to give back to the community, you're already giving a lot to the community, but if you want to give back, just give back. Go to the community directly. Rather than trying to set up a government anti-Zama unit, go talk to the mining houses and set up an anti-Zama unit yourself. Do the thing. Just do the thing. Do not go and play political games where you are always going to be outmaneuvered by politicians who know how to play the game better than you do. So we're not anti-big business, but we are extremely critical of how they are now part of the problem. We want them to be part of the solution. So we are engaging with them constructively, but publicly we're not afraid to criticize the posture that they've taken.
Yeah, and I think one of the examples here is national health insurance, another nice sounding policy supposedly to ensure universal health care. But what that really means in practice is depriving ordinary South Africans of their ability to choose their healthcare providers and to maintain their own medical needs, because the state has failed to provide that. So there are many people in South Africa, unfortunately, are reliant on our public healthcare system. And here again, we see the failure of the policy advocacy. Has this access slowed down NHI? No, it's, I would argue, actually enabled it, because Discovery Health, which provides an excellent service, which many people depend on, they've said, well, we have a social obligation to ensure universal healthcare in South Africa. Nonsense, they don't. They have an obligation to the members of their medical scheme. They have an obligation to their staff. They have an obligation to their shareholders, their directors. They have these duties first, not some nebulous political agenda that's actually serving somebody else and their interests.